Well, hello, folks. Been a while. Uh, it's been a very rainy, stormy year so far in Portugal, and I've had fun watching the big wave, giant wave surfing at Nazaré. Tomorrow, the next day, and the following day, there's going to be huge swell from offshore storm, and so the waves are going to be gigantic. I don't know if they'll be of the shape and type coming from the right direction to allow for tow surfing, but maybe. I probably will go out just to have a look at the storm because it's an awesome place to look at gigantic waves. You can really get close to them, and so it's really dramatic. You know, you're not looking 200 yards or 300 yards out to sea. They're just breaking right by the lighthouse there. So you get this sense of power and scale that's unprecedented or unusual at these kind of surf sites, big wave surfing. So that's fun. Out and about enjoying the sun before the rain hits and the storms hit again. It's just weather, but you know, in my mind, I'm always thinking about the climate situation. So I maybe correlate the weather with that unduly. Maybe it's not as correlated as I think, but it just seems like there's a lot of wild weather around the world all the time these days. Maybe because I'm focused on it, I see it like that, and maybe it isn't like that in reality. I don't know. But yeah, been rainy, been stormy. So I'm going to read a piece I wrote for my blog that I now call Cospelon, but on the site it says Globe Hackers blog. Just in case somebody wants to, you know, consume the information like that. It's not a big deal or anything, but there's some things in it that I might want to clarify a bit. If you're interested, and I'll put the link in the description to the video so you can read it if you want. A lot of my work these days, creative work, I'm kind of looking at things from a deep time perspective. And I've always had multiple perspectives on things because of my travels. And so, you know, I'm just more experienced across cultures than most people, I guess. And so I have a broad mind and a kind of a open heart towards the way things are done in other cultures. And I'm fascinated by deep time, so I read a lot of books about like geology and, you know, other epochs, ages, you know, dinosaurs, but not just dinosaurs. What's the Holocene? What does that mean? And when did it come and why? You know, that relates to climate also. And there's speculation and academic research that, you know, some Mesopotamian empires disappeared because of climate change, but usually these things would take hundreds of years to happen. And obviously there's no one cause for civilizational collapse. And I'm fascinated with civilizational collapse because I have this feeling that we're going to experience that this century. Can't put a date on it, but you know, it just seems like there are a lot of things that are going to break down. We already have all these challenges in our institutions with postmodernism, wokeism, identity politics, and so on and so forth. So I included a piece, an interview with Steven Pinker on that I thought was extremely good. Yeah, institutional kind of stresses that are happening, things having to do with democracy, the kind of democracy that we think we have or we talk about, or democratic institutions, if we have them, different ideological points of view and perspectives, competing ideas, and so on and so forth. And then we have nukes, and then we have you know, problems with the way we approach medicine and public health and so on and so forth. But, you know, like Pinker says in his books, things are relatively pretty good, and I've experienced that over my 65 years of running around the world, benefiting from modernity and all our wonderful tools and relative safety in all the places I've lived and worked. You know, it's been pretty damn good, actually. I don't really have much to complain about it, but in my creative heart, you know, I see incrementalism as important, so protopian rather than utopian, thinking that if we can be around for 1,000 generations and slowly, carefully, wisely develop our ideas and technologies and so on, we might achieve amazing things. So I was binge watching this season of For All Mankind, which is on Apple, where I am, Apple TV. It's a counterfactual history story about what would have happened if the Soviet Union and the United States invested more money in the space race and in space exploration. So there was a big competition between the Soviet Union and the United States during the Kennedy era and Johnson era, where, you know, it was a point of pride and power and so on for the two powers at that time during that Cold War. I think we're in another Cold War now, which is sprouting all these proxy wars, and they existed in Africa and Central America and Indochina and so on back in that period of time. Anyway, we went a different direction, and we kind of, after the space shuttle disasters and so on, we kind of went away. You know, Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about the positive aspects of you know, space exploration and so on. In other words, you have a global common purpose that's bigger than everything, nation states and ideologies and so on, and that's to explore the universe and put a colony on Mars and this and that and the other thing. It's fascinating. It's counterfactual. Everything happens differently, but not everything. And it's a fun show. It's not like scientifically equivalent or perfect. A lot of things going on in that show just couldn't happen scientifically, I think. But it's a TV show, and it's a lot of fun. So in my mind, it's like if we had a focus, a common human purpose, globally, global human purpose, we might be able to sort out our differences more diplomatically rather than these proxy wars, and invest in things that are going to be of a huge benefit to humanity and life on Earth, which is important to me. If there is a sixth extinction, if we're destroying life on Earth, that's not good. If there's anthropogenic stresses and externalities from doing business as usual that are not good for the environment, unsustainable, it's not good. And I think these are problems, not just engineering problems, but they're problems that cultures and philosophies and faiths and science and engineering and technology can easily cope with if we have enough time. So we just need the time, you know, to figure out how to deal with all this stuff. And then, you know, thousands of years from now, who knows what would be possible? Maybe we would terraform Mars. I don't know. But the idea that we're going to accomplish that, Elon Musk or somebody in a public company that's concerned with quarterly profits, that's not going to happen. You know, you have to decide about the trade-offs of making a huge investment like that. So the energy transition is like that. Whether or not, you know, obviously electric cars aren't going to save us. We still need to mine all of these rare earths and other minerals and so on to make this new energy equipment. So that's not going to go anywhere. without thinking things through on a more, in a different way of analyzing economics and socioeconomics and so on. And Pinker makes a point in the video that I included in that article that culture is a difficult thing. And he says it really well, so I hope you'll watch that. But, you know, things go viral, people believe weird things. You know, you can't just expect that you can nudge, that policy or governments or private companies can nudge people in a certain direction that achieves a closer to optimum culture in terms of values and behaviors and goals and so on. Then we have AI and AGI coming along. All these really rapid changes that are happening that we really can't slow down, because the people who have the resources and control to do business are concerned with making money. You know, more and more money to get more and more control. Then there's audience capture. They believe their own PR and they think that they know what's best for everybody, right? I think there's a real danger today that we succumb to totalitarianism, to fascism, so on. And inequality is a thing, and it is not good for society to have really huge disparities between haves and have-nots. But anyway, there's all these different subjects. So in my mind, I'm trying to imagine what would happen if we go through a civilizational collapse and perhaps lose billions of people and are forced to survive under radically different circumstances in a radically different environment with rapidly shifting ecosystems that can support communities at scale. Obviously, we just become tribal, you know, wandering around. There's another piece I was reading about Africa, how complex that is, not just geologically, but culturally, how colonial influence, you know, it comes and goes based on what the colonial powers want to get out of the place, because they're not going there just to leave institutions, you know, freedom, democracy, free speech, civil rights, rule of law, court systems, you know, medical, education. No, they're not going there to do that. They're going there to extract wealth of various kinds. And they use violence and coercion many times over diplomacy and persuasion to accomplish that. So, you know, you go in, you have better guns, and they can't fight you. You give them the technology that's just a little bit older, and you use the newer technology to maintain control and extract whatever you want out of that. Colonialism is a thing, but not in the postmodern sense. That's going way too far. You know, ideas don't have race. Ideas are ideas. And there are truths, you know, and truth claims need to be interrogated. And you have to understand how a truth claim becomes accepted and normalized, a cultural, social norm, a scientific theory or whatever. Anyway, you can talk about all that kind of stuff too. But if we could figure out a way to slow down and have a common purpose across cultures, and we had a commitment to that, I think we'd have to, you know, think very carefully about capitalism and fossil capital. Obviously, energy is a big thing. That's why I mentioned Nate in the article, and Nate Hagen's The Great Simplification podcast. Because, you know, we've gotten great things from this system, but it's also caused a lot of damage, and the damage is starting to manifest. It's starting to be noticeable, you know. And so if we just continue to market stuff, goods and services to each other, and let inequality get out of hand, and let global heating get out of hand, and so on and so forth, eventually we're going to have to pay the price. I mean, it's going to fall down. Something bad's going to happen. There's a vast literature on this coming from multiple domains, big, broad perspectives on it. And it's a real deal. It's a real thing. So you're not being a catastrophist if you are curious about this. You're just kind of noticing reality, and maybe you're curious about it, what would be the consequences of our actions, of business as usual, and so on. So yeah, you can accuse me of that, apocalypticism or whatever, but open any good book and you'll see stories of the floods and the cities being melted by God and so on. And way back when, the explanation was God did it. Now we know that it might have been an asteroid, that blew up in the atmosphere and rained down over the city and melted all the people and turned them all into salt, something like that. We have lots of creation stories across all cultures, and we tended to ascribe mystical causes to things that we couldn't explain, but we can explain a lot more these days. So we know what the hell is happening. Somehow we got to realize that something must be done, and it has to be done cooperatively across nation states globally. We need global institutions. That doesn't mean you have to be, give up your culture or your dialect or your special language or, your favorite sport or your idea of what it means to be a man or something like that. No. You can keep all that and still recognize that we have challenges that face Homo sapiens on this planet Earth and that have to be solved. That's what I'm writing about creatively, looking forward hundreds of thousands of years potentially, grounding my ideas in science and history, even though I'm not a scientist or a historian. I don't claim to be an expert at anything. Just creatively, when you're imagining scenarios, telling stories, it's good to have some information or experience that informs and animates the story and the characters and all that kind of stuff. So I probably talked too long already, so I'll stop. I'm going to read that article, and I hope you're sticking with me because I plan to start putting up some different kinds of content. It's still going to take time. I'm not getting any younger, but you can only do so much with your day. So if you're back with me now, one or two of you watching this, I appreciate you. Thanks a lot. And I do hope you'll stick with me and that you'll click like and comment and all that kind of stuff that people keep asking people to do. That's the thing you're supposed to do as a content creator, whatever. I don't really view myself in that way because, I'm just doing this because I'm compelled to do so. I have to do it. I don't know why. It's crazy. Like, why do you want to be an actor? Because I have to be. It's the only thing I can do. So, yeah. Thanks, and I'll talk to you again soon. This is Stephen, aka Bulliam T, out. Hello, folks. I'm back again. So, anyway, just going to read through this and comment a bit on this blog post. Whenever you write a blog, or whenever I write a blog, I see something or read something, and it makes me, I don't know, it compels me to write something down as if it mattered, but it's fun, and it helps me think things through a bit. Of course, when I write something down, I can't cover everything that I'm thinking about. So, usually I'm recommending that you go listen to other people and read other people's content to fill in the blanks if you have time and you're interested. But sometimes I want to elaborate more on something because I think it's important for me to do so, and it might be of value to some of the listeners. So anyway, this one's called, frankly, the Gurometer and the End Times. And, I sometimes listen to the Decoding the Gurus podcast. I find it entertaining. Sometimes the hosts there kind of go on and on and on, entertaining themselves before and after an interview or a commentary, which sometimes it's a little bit, too much for me, but I just fast forward through those parts, but it's okay. I still think they've got a good sense of humor, that they're earnest and sincere, that they try to do a good job with their critiques and pointing out their reactions to certain content creators and intellectual influencers and public intellectuals and experts in various fields. So, it's fun. And in particular, I enjoy the way they treat Brett Weinstein and Jordan Peterson. Now, I'm not somebody who's going to tell you that everything Brett or Jordan says is nonsense, because it isn't. Sometimes they say things that are interesting to me and that I find insightful and useful. But overall, the package is over the top. And so it's irksome to me. Not the most comfortable people for me to read or listen to. So I don't. I just stopped. And as far as Sam Harris goes, he has a very common view with many people in the West and in the United States, Canada, wherever. Basically that, the West, or the United States of America, does everything for the right reasons. Basically, all it's trying to do is make sure everybody has pizza and cheeseburgers and Disneyland and freedom, democracy, and all this kind of stuff. Biden did his State of the Union address yesterday, and, it's just full of platitudes. And you've heard it all before, and it doesn't matter who says it. Nothing's going to change, because the world is really running under the rubric, or under the system of, fossil capitalism, a neoliberalism with neocon ideological overtones, and on and on. It's basically profits first. The market is not free, and basically the market is the stock market, stocks and bonds and derivatives, and leverage buyouts, hedge funds, so on, specialized hedge funds like catastrophe bonds, cat bonds, and so on. For the big players that most of us aren't involved in really that much, unless we like to trade stocks or, on a certain level ourselves. We're all involved with it through pension funds and 401ks and, myriad of other, connections, nodes in the network of this system. So none of us are free of it. And in particular, in terms of, proxy wars during the Second Cold War, none of us are innocent, because, the people that we allow to run things are running these conflicts. They're getting us into them. They're not getting us out of them. The propaganda is so pernicious and intense and difficult to parse and feel sometimes, because it's so much inundated in everything. It's so permeant that we don't notice it, and it's difficult to put on our critical thinking, our Peter Boghossian critical thinking, Socratic brain, and sort through everything that we bump into on a daily basis. So, but whether we like it or not, we participate in this. So maybe the West is the best, and the best of all possible worlds. in the candide sense and, feel the irony. But for all the good things that we've gotten out of it, railroads and jet airplanes and all that, there have been consequences to it. So cultural, social, ideological, political, but also material and technological and scientific advancement or progress or changes or development or emergence, or call it what you will. They have their positive sides and their negative sides, positive aspects and negative aspects. So whatever the West came up with, it also helped to create the preconditions for the sixth extinction, for the acidification of ocean, plastic pollution, all this kind of thing. So, pollution and nuclear weapons and all kinds of other types of oppression, like rentierism and so on. This whole idea that you're going to own nothing and rent everything and be happy. I can, like I've talked about on my bicycle rides, I can imagine that, someday people are going to be, taking a micro payment out of my hot wallet every time I take a breath, So they're going to tax the plebs and proles in various stealthy ways until we're just completely wrecked or angry, I think. But until then, we have enough diversion and distraction and fun, at least in the wealthy West, in the weird world, that we're not going to think about it too much. But the rest of the world exists, and they think differently, have different perspectives on things, believe different beliefs, different cultures, religions, ideologies, and so on. And they exist, and they're not going away. So the end of history, it's going to be a hard slog to get to the point where Russians are just like people in Minnesota, or Chinese people are just like folks in Florida, So Sanya and Florida become sister states, and you have all your retired Chinese upper middle class folks in Sanya Island in southern China, and you have Florida, and then maybe you have Portugal, and so on. Gated health communities with robot helpers and healthcare and shuffleboard and croquet and Roomba classes. Sorry, that's not a thing. Isn't that a vacuum cleaner? Anyway, yeah, it's going to be a hard slog to end history, and a lot of people are going to have to die before that happens, unfortunately. But that's the game. The game is that the United States is the best of all possible worlds. It's the greatest country ever. And, people should get with the program, or, you're in trouble. Yeah, that sounds like a mafia boss to me, like a triad boss or a Yakuza boss, Oyabun, omae tachi wa, blah, blah, blah. The Oyabun talking to everybody saying, get with the program, the rules-based order, or we're going to initiate sanctions and a regime change proxy war against you. Now, you can look at it from various perspectives. But there isn't black and white necessarily. There are better, more optimal systems and situations and worse. And I come from a more optimal one, so I'm very fortunate and thankful about that. But it doesn't mean we're perfect, or we don't have a lot of improvements that we have to make. That's my opinion. That's how I see it. Different people articulate it in different ways. So frankly is part of Nate Hagen's project, which is the Great Simplification, and I go on into that. I appreciate him and the guests he has on and so on. And even though I like Jim Rutt and people like that, Jamie Wheel, I'm not a consultant who's memorized my PowerPoint deck and can just riff on it like a jazz player, like Jamie Wheel. Anytime I feel like it. It's not my business, not my job. I used to consult, but I don't do that anymore. And so, maybe I'm not the most articulate and entertaining person to talk about this. That's why I share things at Facebook Globe Hackers and on my blog. It's my little project. So the end times, we know what that is. I think a lot of people intuitively are feeling like something's coming to an end and something else is going to happen. We are facing some serious challenges that we just can't fix. You know, we can't ask a superhero like Elon Musk to come along and fix it. You know, these people are con men. You know, Donald Trump's a con man. In my opinion, Reverend Sung Young Moon was a con man, Asahara Shoko. But you don't have to be part of a cult to be a great con man. You can be the head of a corporation or the House Speaker, the Speaker of the House in the United States government. And, you know, I just don't think that at the end of the day, they're motivated by or incentivized by or have our best interests at heart. They're not, you know, this whole idea about sacredness, it's not like a, you know, metaphysical thing. If you just know what you're dependent on, like clean rivers, clean water, clean air, healthy ecosystems, plants and animals and microbes and all this kind of stuff, you might feel a deeper connection to it, but we don't. We feel a connection to our paycheck and the stuff we can buy. And, you know, status is something every one of us can get now, one way or another, through social media or through little things that we do. You know, we can all feel pretty much empowered and princely if we know how to work and focus and sacrifice and suffer a bit. And if we get lucky a few times, maybe we feel our power, you know, our empowerment, and we feel pretty cool, you know. We have our own audiences, we have our friends who think we're amazing, and we could buy that truck, you know. We had to borrow $80,000, but, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, when you pay interest. Anyway, people aren't necessarily thinking about other ways to do things, but we all, whether you're someone in Chirac or East LA, some areas of the United States, if you're on the subway in Manhattan now, you know, you may not have much, but you still want status. So you buy the right shoes, you buy the right clothing, the right bling, hang out with the cool crowd, do crazy things, and you get your status from that. Or maybe it's, you know, telling stories about how you did Forex and made $1 million by the time you were 25 or something like that. We love pecking orders. It's the way it is. And greed is an addiction. So anyway, I'll read some of this. Frankly, the Gurometer and the End Times. Greed is an addiction. It's a machine that must constantly be fed. DJ McHale. Yeah, greed is an addiction. Well, yeah, I just want to insert here that the debunkers of gurus, they often talk about metaphors, you know, too many metaphors. But metaphors is really common in all cultures and language. They could also comment on, you know, the memeplex or viral memes or memetics, this type of thing as well, and look at it in that way. I think, I don't know if they have done that much, but we tend to focus on metaphors and not on the idea, the concept of memes. Anyway, so we laid the tracks for the machine, superorganism, modern civilization, call it what you will. A bullet train with a super energy system that has evolved with technology for thousands of years. The tracks lead to a Himalayan-sized granite wall and the train's speed increases at a higher rate year on year. The kinetic energy released when the train hits the wall will produce an unprecedented extinction event. Maybe via nuclear war, pandemics, or rapid climate change, or perhaps the elites will find it necessary to mow the grass using the tools of science, engineering, and technology. So, since the Gaza thing started, the war there, we've all become familiar with that expression, mow the grass, which the Israelis came up with when they talked about every once in a while there's some violence and Israel feels compelled to go in and kill a lot of people, a disproportionate number when compared to whatever was hit in Israel in general. And that's just a historical, absolute fact, empirical fact. So I sometimes think when I'm imagining stuff that, sometimes people need to be culled. And sometimes there are people out there who can figure out ways of doing that and making money while they do it. But that's another story for another time. So they're experimenting with military robots in Gaza now. Now this is an article by another person I follow, which is Caitlin Johnstone. I think she's worth reading, even though you might not like her tone or agree with everything she says or her perspective, her language. I'm amazed that people try to redefine genocide or ethnic cleansing in the light of what's happening in Gaza. I mean, it is what it is. The definition is quite clear, and what's happening amounts to that by definition, but people tend to equivocate. I think it's crazy. But anyway, Caitlin's worth reading, I think, so that's a shout-out recommendation there. So global neoliberal fossil capitalism is busy testing autonomous robot weapons systems on battlefields. It neglects careful diplomacy and has a morbid penchant for game-theoretic rivalries dependent on financialized transactions that primarily benefit large investors. So the guru debunkers often criticize Game B, frames like that. But what they really should take on board or talk about, I think, is game theory and how that relates to the whole thing. 0 to 1, Peter Thiel, monopoly capitalism, unregulated capitalism, things like that. And just the kind of sense that, there are others out there, barbarians at the gates that you have to control or kill or exploit through colonialism, various forms of it. And there are different forms of it, when you're holding a country hostage via sanctions and other softer mechanisms, as well as military bases and special operations groups, in order to extract minerals for high-tech sector, business sector, it's loosely related to a kind of colonialism. Anyway, you can study that if you want. It's a thing. And generally, these financialized transactions benefit large corporations and big investment banks and so on, but not really you. It doesn't really trickle down. So I'm continuing. The propaganda machine tells us who to fear when we really should fear the owners of the propaganda machine. But of course, that would require some really deep interrogation of your own thought processes and thinking and the ideas that you take for granted, and a reevaluation and critique of information that's coming across your screens or desk every day. And of course, many books have been written, Bernays and, all this kind of stuff over the years that you can read. And people have been commenting on this for centuries. And in particular, the 19th and 20th century, where propaganda and mass media became incredible tools to motivate mass actions, world wars and so on. Anyway, that's not all. I mean, you have to think about it for yourself, but there it is. Continuing. Frankly, I don't see any way we will avoid a rapid reduction in Homo sapiens population as this century continues. Nate Hagens has some ideas about how we might mitigate the severity of the anthropogenic population crash and the sixth extinction. So, it's just my opinion that we have some challenges that are going to kill a lot of people in the future. You can read Club of Rome content if you want. You can read ideas about overshoot and so on. You can think that perhaps, like that TV show For All Mankind, we'll be mining asteroids in a heartbeat because, there's a super billionaire, superhero genius out there. Or we're going to get cold fusion, day after tomorrow. And with all that extra free energy, too cheap to meter, do you think business people want a too cheap to meter energy source? Of course they don't. That's going to be co-opted somehow and made into a for-profit business. But even so, if you had all the energy you needed, would you use it to make more stuff, more paper clips, to sell, more iPhones? Like every 6 months, a new generation it pops out. And since we have robotics, more sophisticated robotics and quantum computing or whatever, we can produce more iPhones. So why not have a new one every 3 months? And you can borrow the money and do micropayments. And I don't know. It's absurd, but you can see how these things could just scale up and continue. And Nate Hagens and his guests have a lot to say about that. But go into that, and I've talked about it in the past, but you can look at that. So the sixth extinction is also a thing, and you should probably look into it because biodiversity is important for human life because we're animals on this planet and we're dependent on all the other life forms here, whether we recognize it or not. Maybe the dodo bird can go extinct and not impact us too much, but there comes a time when the fish in the sea can't breathe and things break down to such a degree that you have mass starvation. So watch the starvation in Gaza and other parts of the world and think about dying in that way. It's not pretty. It's pretty nasty. It's a horrible thing to see your children eat a small meal once a day and to skip meals 2 or 3 days a week in order to feed your children, like what's happening in Gaza now. It's a horrible experience. I wouldn't wish on any people in the world, except perhaps venal politicians who don't give a damn about anybody but themselves. Narcissistic politicians, you know who you are. So then I have a thing here where I copied and pasted, quoted the Great Simplification description from Nate's website. And then in my opinion, he's a straightforward guy and I appreciate him and I hope you guys will listen to him. So he has a series, continuing with my blog post, he has a series he calls Frankly, where he shares his ideas, thoughts, and feelings regarding his work. On Frankly 55, he talks about 7 critical interventions for the future. They are all solid tasks that would help us improve our situation immensely if implemented by enough people worldwide. So I suggest you take a moment and listen to that, and I included the video in the blog post. Continuing, if only enough people would implement these approaches, and I don't think they will, because I don't think there's any way currently to motivate them to shift over. And cultural, social norms are very hard to nudge, and it takes time to do it. These paradigm shifts, so-called, don't happen quickly. Really. I mean, it takes a long time for things to turn the ship around. And I mentioned that, in my opinion, Nate's one of the good guys. He's not so full of himself. He's an educator. So currently, there are plenty of intellectual influencers with great ideas on the internet. Some are annoying, egotistical narcissists with savior complexes. Decoding the Gurus podcast takes these types to task in an entertaining, if not at times somewhat obnoxious way. So, I'm not saying they're just taking the piss out of everybody. They're making a sincere effort to kind of dissect aspects of their guruism. And it's a good thing to do, I think. It's kind of fun and entertaining as well. So I put in the blog below as a description of the Gurometer from the Decoding the Gurus website. The Gurometer comprises 10 key characteristics of gurosity, which the decoders will use to score the gurus in future episodes. This was from their website. And I included a link to a document that describes the Gurometer in greater detail. But 1 is galaxy braininess, 2, cultishness, 3, anti-establishmentarianism, 4, grievance mongering, 5, self-aggrandizement and narcissism, 6, Cassandra complex, 7, revolutionary theories, 8, pseudo-profound bullshit, 9, conspiracy mongering, 10, profiteering. And then I put their Brett Weinstein and Jordan Peterson, Heroes and Martyrs, video up from YouTube from one of their podcasts. So I write, if you're familiar with Brett and Jordan, what do you think about their Gurometer rating after viewing that episode? In my ever so humble opinion, Christopher and Matthew are at their best when discussing Brett Weinstein and Jordan Peterson. Few online weird geniuses have escaped their witty and sharp-witted criticisms. I'm a bog-standard citizen interested in learning how things work, nowhere near guru status. And as I said, Nate is an educator. He studies across domains so he can educate, hoping to empower us so that we can be part of the solutions and not part of problems. Well, I don't think the Decoding the Gurus has talked about Nate Hagens. But anyway, everybody is vulnerable to audience capture, so I continue. As you know, I'm a reader and I read a lot of books and so on. I have a little thing there. And I mentioned that these obsessions to understand things and to understand civilizational collapse and deep time and whatnot led me to the Sensemaker clique, which is another thing that the gurus are interested in. And I've been following them for a long time, way before the gurus had a podcast. The decoders had a podcast. So sensemakers include people like Jim Rutt, Daniel Schmachtenberger, Jamie Wheel, Eric Weinstein, David Fuller, Alexander Bain, Nora Bateson. I'm a fan of all these people to a certain degree in a certain way, even though, as I said, I don't really like Eric Weinstein at all. And a lot of the gurus online are kind of pompous asses, in my opinion. So after watching some of their stuff, I generally just stop. But a lot of the guests are very interesting. Over the years, various cliques of intellectual influencers have had many monikers: the Four Horsemen, referencing the new atheists, and the intellectual dark web, people like Sam Harris, are other examples. And then I put a link to an article on the perils of audience capture by a guy on Substack. So he's the Gurometer. And it's an interesting article on that. So audience capture is the bane of any decent intellectual influencer or online expert. Many decent minds have acquired Gurometer traits as their fame and fortune grew. It's a hazard of the trade. So what is audience capture? Audience capture is a self-reinforcing feedback loop that involves telling one's audience what they want to hear and getting rewarded for it. So as I've said before, there was a nurse during the COVID pandemic who was discussing the daily goings-on and reading through articles and studies and so on. And he got captured by his audience because there were a lot of anti-vaxxers watching, and they kept, liking and subscribing when he would be skeptical, anything anti-vax. And he just stuck with it because, it was making his channel huge, blow up, So anyway, continuing, I sincerely hope that Nate and his friends can stay focused on the many good reasons they do their work and not get distracted by the attention they are getting. Their project is very complex and difficult. Sadly, I don't think it will ever meet with much success. The bullet train has a mind of its own that emerged from our nature and seems destined to self-destruct. So without going into all the literature and aspects that we can dissect about human nature, psychology and brain science and endocrinology and sociological perspectives and anthropological and, epistemics and ontology and all these philosophical angles and whatnot, and religious and spiritual and metaphysics, it's all there. But basically, at the core of what we are as social animals, and you can read this from many sources, studies of apes and baboons and chimps and all kinds of other animals, but human beings in particular. So I say that we're going to self-destruct, and I say here's why. Homo sapiens living in large communities are venal, status-seeking animals concerned with social dominance hierarchies. So that's at the core of the problem. So if you go back in time and study ancient civilizations, Sumeria, Babylon, Egypt, whatever, wherever in the world, you'll note the impact that large communities have had on ecosystems. They had to come up with irrigation systems and water systems and food production systems that could feed large populations in the city. And a lot of times that was at the detriment of the overall environment around the cities, the big city-states, the kingdoms, the empires. And you can just see this throughout history, deforestation and other impacts. And of course, all these holy books talk about, floods and devastation and so on. Now, they came about probably very gradually, but the flood was probably real, and part of the cause of it was probably anthropogenic, meaning that human beings had a hand in it because they were successfully growing their communities and exploiting natural resources to a degree where, we deforested the whole place, or we killed all the animals, the megafauna, they go extinct one after another. And this has been going on for thousands of years. So fast forward to the 19th century and you have fossil fuels, and then you have exploitation of natural resources on steroids. So, we can use a lot more. And then people talk about overshoot and carrying capacity, stuff like that. So do we have enough? Can we produce enough of what we need to continue economic growth under the current ideology forever? The answer is empirically and obviously scientifically no. There are limits, and if we don't know our limits and know how to work within our limits, we're not going to make it. And we're greedy, venal people, and we seek status, and we're motivated by that. And social dominance hierarchies are huge pecking orders, So we all fall into place. And the people who want to take power and exercise it for whatever reason, name somebody. Go ahead. What? Oh no, Putler? No, whatever. Xi Jinping, and Sam Harris is always going on and on about Kim Jong-un, Well, he was born there and raised there as a little prince, so, he wants to keep his scam going. But there are aspects of the United States of America that are equally as cultish and weird. And we take a lot for granted when we have faith in a system. So can the Constitution of the United States evolve? Or is it the Word of God? How do you interpret the Bible or the Islamic jurisprudence, the legalistic ideas in the Quran and Hadith and so on and so forth. But anyway, point your finger to a culture and a timeline and dissect it. Many good books out there. So, moving on, much has been written over the millennia. Open any holy book or a good book and think about all those authors and storytellers. Try to imagine the times they lived in and the challenges they have faced. Think of all the violence, pain, suffering, and death they've described. Think of all the species and ecosystems that Homo sapiens have impacted throughout our existence. Think of the impact we have on each other. Think of the 7 deadly sins we can't seem to overcome, despite sages, prophets, priests, priestesses, teachers, wise men and women, shamans, poets, playwrights, etc. I could add, the decoders of gurus and intellectual online influencers and Nate Hagens and everybody else who's trying to make incremental progress somehow. Define progress as improvement, okay, in everything. I think we have improved a lot. I don't really want to go back to living in biblical times personally, but anyway. And what about leadership? Moving on. What about leadership? Our leaders are motivated by greed, status, and pecking orders. Of course, it's not all bad. One can feel love and perceive beauty, joy, flow, connection, harmony, peace, and wisdom from these stories and within communities and relationships. We know beauty when we see it and need it as much as we need to breathe. So then I quote Toni Morrison, poet, author. Quote, I think of beauty as an absolute necessity. I don't think it's a privilege or an indulgence. It's not even a quest. I think it's almost like knowledge, which is to say, it's what we were born for. I think finding, incorporating, and then representing beauty is what humans do, with or without authorities telling us what it is. I think it would exist in any case. The startle and the wonder of being in this place, the overwhelming beauty. Some of it is natural, some of it is man-made, Some of it is casual. Some of it is a mere glance, is an absolute necessity. I don't think we can do without it any more than we can do without dreams or oxygen. Toni Morrison. Anyway, there are many quotes like that, Khalil Gibran, or, pick a poet. We must have been doing some things right over the past 400 years, or we wouldn't live in a world with 8 billion people. Read Steven Pinker to gain perspectives on why things aren't so bad. And then I include a video where Steve Pinker is talking about what's wrong with our universities, and he's taking on, the woke thing. And he's so eloquent when he talks about it in this interview, and it's just a good, Pinker-esque presentation on the challenges at the university with postmodernism and critical theory, and how that's, emerged recently, the last 10 years. And what we need to do about it. He also talks about academic freedom and civil discourse, how important that is. And I agree. So important. So I go on. However, as I have said many times, we are all accelerationists now, and that's referring to accelerationism. There's all kinds of brands of that, from left to right, reactionary to lefty. And then I include a link to a book called The Divide, which is a brief guide to global inequality and its solutions, because I just think it's important. So accelerationism, I'll define that here in the blog, is a range of revolutionary and reactionary ideas in left-wing and right-wing ideologies that call for the drastic intensification of capitalist growth, technological change, infrastructure sabotage, and other processes of social change to destabilize existing systems and create radical social transformations, otherwise referred to as acceleration. So you have that on the far left and far right and everywhere in between. Remember Steve Bannon, dismantle the administrative state, or even Ronald Reagan talking about the problem with the world is government. I would say it's bad governance, but anyway, he wasn't necessarily an accelerationist, but, Star Wars and military spending, and some people say that was a factor, one of the many factors in the fall of the Soviet Union. So yeah, it happens. And there are a multitude of reasons why empires like the Soviet Union can fall. It's never just one or two or three things, A, B, and C, or possibly all three. It's more than that. So we can't control the genies we've liberated or understand the techno black boxes we've invented. And we sure don't know how these things will change our environment and impact our psychology, health, and ecosystems. We are running dozens of uncontrolled experiments affecting life with little concern for future generations. So yeah, whether you think they're over the top or not, Schmachtenberger and Wheel wax on really eloquently about these things, I think, on a multitude of levels, weaving a very beautiful tapestry of intertwined ideas and from various domains. and it's poetic, but it's interesting to me. I kind of am attracted to it, but a lot of other people might not be. You can see the Decoding the Gurus for that. They talk about all these guys. So Nate mentioned the 1500, an allusion to the elite that run the world. He didn't use the term elite that run the world, but the 1500, and how we must help them understand where we are headed. So then that's why I included the book on inequality. So inequality is the difference in social status, wealth, and opportunity between people or groups. People are concerned about corruption and social inequality. Anyway, when Jordan Peterson talks about this, he tends to have a lot of fallacious reasoning and arguments. But basically, the gist of it is there's never been absolute equality. And when you read books about inequality from various authors, they're never saying there was absolute equality ever. Everyone understands status and pecking orders and all of that, which is the crux of this little blog post. It's a thing, and too much of it creates problems, and always has. So throw a dart at a timeline, go back any context, any place in the world, pick a geographical location, throw a dart at the timeline, 1100 BC or 875 AD or Common Era, whatever. And you can study it. There's plenty of information there to put in that frame and think about inequality and solutions to it. You can have institutions like slavery or feudalism or, serfdom, whatever. You can have all kinds of kingdoms and things that can deal with, people. You can have not Iranian, but people from that part of the world, the Persian area, cow herders wandering into what's now Pakistan and India and creating a caste system. People are just born at a certain level. There's all kinds of solutions to it. You can also have human rights and civil rights and rule of law and all that kind of thing. But then who codes that? Who develops it? Who decides? Is it democratic? How democratic? Who's voting and for whom? If corporations can more or less buy votes through various mechanisms, does your vote really count? You can become really cynical when you look into all this stuff. So we hope that if the rich and powerful embrace a more sustainable and gentler culture, invest in it, and provide leadership, it will help us solve some of the problems Nate and his guests are concerned with. But what do you give a man who has everything? More control. And they'll never have enough. They're not wise men, they're rich men. And their wealth is all about having more control over more resources that will make them more money. Status, power, and the pecking order are what concern them. It's a feedback loop, an Ouroboros. So, I don't know how anyone could dispute that. I mean, at the end of the day, you have everything. If you still want to be a player, if you're motivated, if you're venal, if you're arrogant, if you're narcissistic, if you're psychopathic, sociopathic, you're going to want more. And you're going to do what it takes to be at the top, to be the oyabun, or the mafia boss, or the president, or the dictator, or whatever. You do what you got to do. And if you rise at the top, you keep your power and you extend it. To the degree that peasants are necessary to sustain the empire, whatever empire, they will be afforded certain protections. However, this isn't out of altruism. It's to maintain the elite's power and control. Now, let's not talk about systemic this, that, and the other thing, racism and whatnot. Let's just acknowledge that the power structures exist and that they're important and that they serve certain purposes or interests. And it doesn't have to be connected to justice or morality or ethics necessarily. So you might think that America's system is the most ethical, moral system in the world. And some people would say, yes, it is because it's a white Christian nation, or yes, it is because it's a progressive, modern, democratic state concerned with social justice and civil rights and so on, or you can describe it any way you want. But, the elite has power for good reasons, and they exercise that power. It's just a fact. So if the plebs and proles want to have any say, they really have to exercise their mass power, their collective power, their energy as communities to figure out what they want and how they want to live and so on and so forth, legal issues, and then force their leaders, whether they're corporate, business, NGO, educational, political leaders, to do what they want. But most of us, we don't really think we have to do that because they're running the system and they're doing a great job because I just bought an electric truck. And, I just got the latest Galaxy phone or whatever, a new iPad, or, I'm renting a nice house. But bit by bit, we're not going to have all that stuff. And we're going to get more and more angry as we have to pay more and more rents with less and less money. And every time somebody comes up with an innovation like, well, why don't we try UBI, which isn't a new thing, by the way. Even Nixon was talking about it. But there's dozens of think tanks and lobbyists and so on, lobby groups that come into the government and say, we want to ban that. It's not good. Everyone will become lazy. Nobody will do anything if you give them $1,000 a month. Or if you give them housing or healthcare or education, if you give them anything, they're just going to stop doing anything. People think that because actually they want to exploit your labor and they want to control that. And they don't want you to be empowered. And by they, I mean a lot of powerful people who control cash flows, payouts, bribes, call it what you will, who can afford the lawyers, the suits, the lobbyists, the academics, the researchers, the think tankers to, put forth their ideologies and their propaganda and make sure that people toe the line or they don't have a career. And it permeates everything, folks. It just does. May sound like a conspiracy, but it isn't. It's just what people do. So all the data and information training AIs and LLMs is an Ouroboros feeding on itself. What comes of it is more of it. Investing in these things exists to get a return on investment and to create more control mechanisms. Now, they're useful tools. I love them. And they don't have to be all bad. If we had a decentralized, democratic way of developing them and on a slow, incremental timeline and not for quarterly profits, these things would create incredible value and a high net good for humanity and life on Earth. I believe that. So I'm not a Luddite. So I include this article here, The Ouroboros of Machine Learning, which is another guy I follow that I really like. Oops. Anyway, I put a bad link in that one. I'll have to fix that. And then I put another link to an article about soaring artificial intelligence stocks to buy. So you missed out on NVIDIA. So here are the feeder companies that surround the ecosystem of building the technology, the machines, the software to run LLMs and AIs systems, because there are a bunch of machines and server farms in various locations running these applications and algorithms and programs and scraping the data from our social media and from the internet and so on and so forth that they can analyze. So there's a whole business ecosystem around that. And if you want to make money and you have money to invest, you might want to look into that and the military-industrial complex, because these proxy wars are not going anywhere anytime soon.
So maybe there's some profits to be had there if you have an extra buck. You know, you drive your Uber, you do your online PR job, you know, your gig economy thing, and you have your 9 to 5, and you have an extra $100 a week. You might want to put it into that. I reckon the stock market's going to be a thing for another 6.92 years. Ha ha, hee hee. Anyway, we'll find out. So our culture creates people with addictions, and the powerful feed on our addictions to maintain control. And you know, you got all your people like pain is a bad thing. You can't tolerate any pain. You better take some opioids to deal with it. And so you have opioid addiction, or maybe you just want to have some recreational fun. You got extra money because you're working on Wall Street. You're a big wolf on Wall Street and you need your cocaine or your yellow, or call it what you will. You need to be medicated. You need your microdosing. You got to do your mushrooms, your ayahuasca and all that. But we're addicted to very banal things that we do every day that we don't even notice, whether it's salty snacks, sugar, whether it's sex, whether it, you know, these addictions can be clinically described in different ways, of course, and some of it more metaphorical and some of it much more physiological. But, you know, we're addicts. We scroll our phone every 10 minutes, whatever, call it an addiction. But anyhow, getting people to behave in certain ways repeatedly is very, very, very lucrative for big companies. So, got your Google. Powerful technology emerged from fossil capitalism, and ordinary people do not control it. We have the illusion of control. We feed the beast. The beast being just the metaphorically, you know, the fossil capitalism, which just means that, you know, without fossil fuels, we would never have had any of this because we needed the cheap energy to develop all of this stuff. We never would have done it if we were just using hydropower or, you know, water mills or windmills or so on. We never would have gotten to it. I mean, it really fueled science, engineering, and technology over the past couple hundred years, and accelerated it. So we're all part of this accelerationism or acceleration of science, engineering, technology. And we haven't really changed much as people, even though there is evolution taking place, I'm sure, on some levels. And we've changed the way we view the world. But anyhow, people in less wealthy communities are helpful and compassionate because they experience the difficulty, pain, love, and beauty of abject survival. They need each other because they are in a more precarious position than wealthier people. Their community has value. None of this is to say that poverty doesn't lead to stressful circumstances that can cause many pathological behaviors, violence, crime, and disease. Poverty is a terrible thing, and we must eliminate it. So, yeah, I don't want to get misinterpreted. You know, it's not fun to be poor, but people in communities where they depend on each other, and that could even be just a church or something, I don't know, a company, a business, you tend to treat each other better, you know. Yeah, go back to the you know, Tokyo Vice. I spent over a decade in Japan, so I watched that. It's very nostalgic for me. Not the story per se, but just the foreigners living in Japan. But yeah, look at the way the Yakuza organize their groups. But anyway, poverty is bad, but when you're wealthy, so wealthy people can buy or rent whatever they want or need and just as quickly dispose of them. And if they're smart, wealthy people, you know, uber wealthy, they just buy it, buy the yacht, buy the plane. If you're just moderately wealthy, if it flies, floats, fucks, or prints, then you rent it, right? That whole thing. You just rent. When I go out to Madeira, I don't have my own yacht. I just charter one. I rent it and I sail it there and back. It's great. Or I charter the plane. And if I want to fly the plane, I fly it. If I want to have somebody else fly it, it's fine. But I just rent it. I rent the Bugatti when I'm in Milano. When I go to Paris, I rent that beautiful Citroen. And, I stay in a 5-star hotel. I don't need a Uber. I need service, you know? So I just rent it. Yeah, if I want to play around a little bit, I don't shit on my own doorstep. I go down somewhere and I just rent some company, an escort, have a little fun, So, yeah. And of course, I'm going to just take my stuff down to the printer and have it printed up. And I'm not going to buy all those damn cartridges. I'm too smart for that. So anyway, think of private equity, flash trading, and colonial exploitation of other people's resources. The pinnacle of control is to be a rentier. Own everything and rent things to the plebs and proles, so they are absolutely dependent on you. Code capital, so you can do this legally and convince everyone it's in their best interest. Create scarcity and war to increase capital on capital returns while exploiting people's fears. Well, the immigrants, you can't stop them. We're all immigrants and always have been. And of course, you have to control things if you have nation states and borders and, different cultures and so on. But this thing's been flexible forever. Borders and kingdoms come and go, and communities and languages and so on and so forth. Modern French and Italian and Spanish isn't like it was 200 or 300 years ago. So things shift quite a bit. And, even if you look at the language of the 60s on video on YouTube, they sound different, don't they, than we do. So everything evolves and shifts. But, the thing at the bottom of it is like, who makes the law? Who makes the rules? Is it really democratic? Are you really involved? And if not, you were convinced to go along with the rules-based order, call anything, whatever it is, the statutes of the city. So think about what your leaders do. Who do they work for? What do they want? As people get wealthier in a material sense, the deadly sins become more pernicious. Call it the Lucifer principle, if you will. And I'm alluding to a book by Howard Bloom that's published quite a while ago, but it's still quite interesting to read. It's not perfect, but it brings up a lot of interesting perspectives on things. It's definitely worth reading. But you can really drink your own Kool-Aid if you're too comfortable and if you're wealthy. It's not hard, and you can get away with murder. In my travels, I've seen. I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but I've seen people from UAE and Qatar and Saudi Arabia and other places in the world where you'd think they'd be very conservative, and when they're in Thailand or other parts of the world, places in Malaysia or other parts of the world, they indulge. Not the men I'm talking about. They do what they want to do, and go against all the rules, but they get away with it. And too big to fail, that kind of thing. Look at all the legal action against Trump. However you think it was motivated or justified or not, there's a lot, and he's probably going to skate on all of it for various reasons. But you wouldn't. You'd get busted. They'd throw away the key. They'd take your house. They'd, put you under conservatorship or something, and you'd be screwed forevermore because you don't have that power. Unfortunately, Even as I listen to good people working hard on solutions, I don't see a way out of our predicament. Every year, we invent more ways to accelerate the bullet train, the inner self destructive urge. And I do think all of us have that to a certain degree. And maybe society has it too. You know, superorganism, however you want to imagine that thing, you know. Some guy was talking to Michael Shermer recently about this idea that, you know, the Gaia kind of thing, or that society has its own life that evolves. You know, I don't know how far down that line of reasoning I would go, but anyway. So knowing this doesn't depress me, I see people doing their work and living their lives. Whatever circumstances one finds oneself in, it's a miracle we are here, and we are only here for a short while. Life will continue on Earth until it ends. Nate experienced a profound sense of community in India. I lived in Colaba near the military security gate in Mumbai for a year. I have lived and worked in 7 countries and grew up in 2. I've never been banged up abroad. Am I simply lucky? I love and respect all cultures. I can't help it. Call it a weakness or label me a cosmopolitan. I love world history and the varieties of social and cultural expression. Anthropology, psychology, sociology are all interests of mine. I'm not an expert in anything. I'm not an academic. Okay, disclaimer, disclaimer. Some people believe their sect has all the correct God-given answers. I think we come up with answers that make sense and fit our circumstances. All holy books are eschatological and apocalyptic, except belief systems in cultures that didn't have to be too concerned with scarcity. Myths postulate what might exist in a higher realm where the challenges of physical existence are transcended. You have samsara or an apocalypse, the judgment day, or you finally transcend the cycle of birth and death. Or maybe you are the son of Zeus, one of the many gods, or the son of the one god. Or you live in a place like the Amazon, where scarcity and the need to defend precious resources are less intensely felt, and you feel part and parcel of all life and a kinship with Mother Earth. You have an animistic sense that the world has a soul. Our civilization commodifies everything. It's relatively soulless. Many people hunger for a deeper connection with things in the world, life, and each other. People think of creating new religions, but we already have many religious traditions. We need new structures, new philosophies of economics, greater respect for our limitations, and patience. We need time for inner growth, as well as just to figure out how things work and, launch technologies when we know how to use them in a more optimal and beneficial way. So, what experiences will transform us when we all aspire to have more, consume more, and covet a mystery? What experiences will transform us when we all aspire to have more, consume more, and covet a mastery of the tools that feed our will to power and longing to win battles within the great game to gain great fame? So the, game theoretic thing. And game theory is a beautiful way to analyze the world. I'll say again. It's very interesting. But, if you have a chance, you're going to try to master the tools to power. And some people think that's great because you need heroes. You need big men of history to get things going. Otherwise, we'd all be nothing. But were the Wright brothers big shots or just curious bicycle mechanics who thought they could fly? Anyway, when this civilization ends and the scale of our communities is greatly diminished, we may return to a gentler, pantheistic time where all is sacred. We may once again live in harmony with nature and our nature and our nature. We may become the protectors and not the destroyers of life. We may have never lived in peace. Perhaps our destiny is the violent end of our species. No more birth and death. Some say the universe is conscious. Some think we live in a computer simulation. Many believe all would be well if we had the same religion or ideology. Well, let it be. If you take it all in, you must take in the good and the bad. Is that being realistic or pessimistic? Think about all we have produced since fossil capitalism fully blossomed in the mid-19th century and became unregulated under neoliberalism in the late 20th century. Are these ideologies and things good for us, life on Earth, and the general health of our planet's ecosystems? For many of us, a good and healthy life would be much simpler, with better relationships and less stuff. If the train wreck doesn't kill us, it may make us wiser. One thing's certain, some of us will find out soon enough. Okay, so that's the end of that. I hope you click on the hyperlinks, watch the videos, and find value in it as I have. And I appreciate your listening. So have a great weekend. Take good care. Bulliam T. Out.